side of the box, and I think that's phenomenal. I think age has nothing to do with it. I think the maturity of a person has something to do with it. I believe the Bahamas needs Mr. Christie. We need Mr. Christie's compassion. We need Mr. Christie's care. We need Mr. Christie's forward-thinkingness. And I believe that the Bahamian people understands and accepts that, and will in 2012 give Mr. Christie that mandate again.
Ryan Bender, do you think we can get a paradigm shift in this country politically with Ingram or Christie being in the leadership of our country?
Well, certainly Mr. Christie, as the leader of the PLP, invites a paradigm shift. I mean, I think Paulette was exactly right in her point that Mr. Christie thinks outside of the box. If you look at some of the economic philosophies in the last administration, that's evident. If you look at the ability of Mr. Christie to put together a group of party supporters, a group of potential candidates like we saw today, I think you could only be impressed by the new ideas, by the energy, by the real diversification of people that you see. So certainly under a PLP-led government by Mr. Christie, I think you could see a paradigm shift in how we are as a country, both socially and economically, as we go through and really try to lift the country out of the doldrums that the Free National Movement government has really put us in.
The governing party has said and has tried to make voters believe that Mr. Ingram is a stronger leader, and they suggest that during the recession, it's a good thing Ingram was running the Bahamas. Let's talk about the strength of your leader, Mr. Christie, for times such as these, say, recessionary times.
Is intimidation the way to govern? Is making people afraid of you the way to govern? Isn't governing coming together of persons with different mindsets for one goal? Is that the country we want for the future? Were you leading me, but I'm so afraid to express how I truly feel? No, sir. I'm going to tell you one of the things I think is great about my leader.
Are you saying that people are afraid of Mr. Ingram?
Oh, yes, I'm not saying so. I'm saying it's real. It's alive in this country. It's here. People are intimidated. But the good thing is, in the PLP, we do not have to be intimidated with Mr. Christie. And one of the things, Mr. Jones, is Mr. Christie allows us to voice our disagreement without feeling as if he will intimidate me at the end of the day. And there are times that I've said I've disagreed to Mr. Christie, and he's allowed me to disagree without me feeling at one moment that I've suddenly been intimidation. Mr. Jones, the Bahamas has changed from the time of Sir Lyndon. We now have in our country a cadre of educated young Bahamians who are very talented, very forward-thinking. Many of those young people have come to the Progressive Liberal Party, willing to give of the resources that this country has poured into them. I think that's phenomenal. If Mr. Christie was not an attractive leader, was not a man open to giving chances to people, many of those young people would not come to this party. Ryan Pindall, though he has a history with this party from his father, would not have come to the PLP if Christie was not a man of forward thinking and openness. That's what this party is about. That's what Christie's about. That's what PLP governance is about.
But hasn't the Free National Movement encroached on the traditional support base of the PLP? The Free National Movement has been able to win some constituencies that 2 decades ago were considered safe seats for the PLP. This encroachment by the FNM on your traditional support base, how do you explain that?
I mean, let's look at 2002 then. This same gentleman they call, what they want to call him, weak or this and that, Mr. Christie, in 2002 won every seat in Nassau except one. So look at the facts. That's where we are. You see, I think when you look at it, politics is relative to what's happening around us. I can assure you right today that Mr. Christie has an approach that really catches you for the most part off guard. I think for the most part when Mr. Christie talks to you, he has a very consultative approach. But Mr. Christie generally has in the back of his mind where he wants to go when he suggests something to us generally in our political settings. Also, when persons talk with Mr. Ingram at this time in our economy, who would have been the better person to lead our economy and our society part, Mr. Christie would have left in foreign reserves record the record numbers when you look at the amount of money we would have had in foreign reserves in our society. Investors, the confidence they had in our society. Dr. Major made a very interesting point just now about how the Bahamas has dropped in the standing when you look at a place where persons want to invest. And this tells us a whole lot. Mr. Christie's style is one where he allows people to express themselves, to be open, and to be honest, and to be accountable. But I would never for one moment think of him as being weak. That's just his style. He's very deliberate. But if you were to do the wrong thing, we'll cut your head off just like that. Bop! That's the kind of person he is.
And Mr. Jones, I would ask you, is it good leadership for somebody to make a decision without listening to experts, without listening to consultants, without listening to your colleagues, when you don't know what decision you're making, and that decision is a wrong decision and leads you down further into a negative swing in the economy or as a country? That's not good leadership. Just because you say, I'm going to make a decision without consulting anybody, doesn't make you a good leader. It makes you a reckless leader at times. I think that one, especially in the terms of where we find ourselves as a country today, a good leader, especially with this environment, is a leader who understands where the country is, who understands from experts and from a varied amount of opinions feeding into the decisions that they have to make. I think when we look at the country where we are, struggling, having a tough time both economically and socially, the good leader today would be one that understands a varied amount of opinions and uses those opinions in making that decision. And that leader, in my opinion, would be Mr. Christie.
Have you been successful as an organization in selling this particular sentiment to the young people in this country in particular?
Well, not only to the young people. I think we have been very successful in the undecideds, in really that independent group that is growing in this country. I think evidence of that is the Elizabeth by-election. For the first time in over 20 years, an opposition party has won a by-election against the government. And we did so by being attractive to those independent groups, to the young groups.
If the independent group is growing in the country, then it follows that the PLP then has not been attracting that independent group. They should really be PLPs, Ryan Pinder.
No, I don't necessarily believe that. Just because you don't have a divide in the country between partisan politics does not mean that a particular political institution, by its policies, by its philosophies, by its cadre of leadership, is not an attractive political organization to that independent group. Just because you have a growing group of free thinkers does not mean that a political party is not attractive to that group. It just means that you might be less and less partisan in a country. That's a good thing, Mr. Jones. That's not a bad thing. And the fact that the PLP can outline itself and be attractive on a policy basis to these independent voters, to these thinkers, I think only puts us in a better position and is only good for governance in this country.
Mr. Jones, you asked a question about as it compared to the seats and the grassroots area of this country, and I really wanted to address that.
The encroachment of F&Ms on PLP strongholds.
I think what the Free National Movement suddenly realized was the base of the Progressive Liberal Party was the inner city for us. And they thought that they would destroy the very foundation of our party by going after that segment of the community. We still won that segment of our community. They tried, but they were not successful. You see, the very foundation of this party is built on that. And our motto, from I grew up a little girl in this party, the motto has always been to help those in need, the less fortunate. The inner city has never, ever, and I believe will never, go against the very foundation of this party. And you would notice something else. Although persons have moved out from the inner city and have moved into the outskirts and the suburbs, many of them are still major supporters of the party. There's something to that.
Let's talk about the vision thing. Where is the Bahamas going, Aaron Sargent? We hear a lot about a lack of vision. Do you see where the Bahamas is going as a young man, as the chairman of the Young Liberals?
Well, currently, I would say under this administration, what I see is the lack of planning, for you know, for better words. You know, we don't see any